Hello to your daily dose of D, to your daily dose with me, to my daily dose of myself that I share with others, which according to the stats, the average watch time on some of these videos is 41 seconds. So I'm so glad that I'm so entertaining for all of you. Hopefully this ages better than it is growing. Anyways, welcome. And got the cutie little stir fur ball sitting next to me here. Sorry, my hair feels not sorry. Anyways, we're just gonna jump right into it because we're gonna. Starting with the City Lights Pocket Poets Anthology, 60th Anniversary Edition, edited by Lawrence Ferlinghetti. And we left off kind of in the middle, but I kind of like to jump around with my poems. So we are going to skip the one that said Christ in it. And we are going to read Jack Kerouac, How to Meditate. Lights out. Fall. Hands aclasped into instantaneous ecstasy like a shot of heroin or morphine. The gland inside of my brain discharging, the good gland fluid, holy fluid, as I hap down and hold all of my body parts down to a dead stop trance. Healing all my sicknesses, erasing all, not even the shred of a I hope you or a loony balloon left in it, but the mind blank, serene, thoughtless. When a thought comes a-springing from afar, with its held forth figure of image, you spoof it out, you spuff it off, you fake it, and it fades, and thought never comes. And with joy you realize for the first time, thinking's just like not thinking, so I don't have to think any more. 1967. We're gonna jump right into it with some political information about the world, because our lives are political, because politics are the shared reality of how we agree to engage with each other. It's something you can choose to be involved in or not. Every day that you live, you're involved in politics. So we are going to read an article from the Jacobin issue number 43, fall 2021, Lower the Crime Rate. And there's a quote in the beginning by Frederick Engels from The Condition of the Working Class in England, written in 1845. And it says, distress due to poverty gives the worker only the choice of starving slowly, killing himself quickly, or taking what he needs where he finds it. In plain English, stealing. And it is not surprising that the majority prefer to steal rather than starve to death or commit suicide. Here, we're going to read this. And then, yeah. So this is called Lower the Crime Rate by Benjamin Fogel. Crime is born out of poverty and the miseries of capitalism. An index of oppression can't be ignored by socialists. In early 2012, the literary journal N+1 plunged headfirst into the Occupy Wall Street era with a 6,000-word article entitled Raise the Crime Rate. Written by Christopher Glazik, and the essay attracted modest attention at the time, but would go on to become an influential provocation. The editorial was a bold call for a progressive movement to radically switch gears from prioritizing, quote, healthcare, abortion, gay rights, early education, progressive taxation, and any number of other worthy objectives, to instead abolishing the U.S. prison system. Glazik backs this up by describing the unacceptable barbarism of prison life in America, shocking readers with horrific examples of the mass rape, beatings, and solitary confinement endemic to incarceration. Glazik's argument is that the relatively low level of crime in America from the late 1990s on was achieved by simply displacing that cry from civil society to the unfree shadow world of the 7 million Americans that live under the direct control or surveillance of the correctional system. Where other leftists from the past and present have argued that it's exactly a democratic socialist politics of redistribution, healthcare, and jobs that could radically reduce poverty and thus crime and violence, Glazik sees such prescriptions as a distraction, citing the high unemployment of our era as being entirely compatible with our falling crime rate. As he put it, crime and unemployment were supposed to rise in tandem. Progressives have been harping on this point for centuries. In fact, the editorial argues that socialist prescriptions aren't just insufficient solutions to ending the nightmare, they're diversions. We must be ready to sacrifice the traditional progressive agenda, Glazik said, on the altar of criminal justice. By divorcing the roots of crime from material conditions, he repeats, the conservative trope about crime being the product of social or cultural pathologies. Things are so dire in Glazik's telling that he explicitly calls for a radical expansion of the death penalty as a way to bring down the incarceration rate. A prisonless society where murderers were systematically executed and rapists were automatically castrated wouldn't be the most humane society imaginable, but it would be light years ahead of the status quo. He also implores progressives to give up on gun control. You'll have a hard time convincing anybody that we should abolish prisons and take away the community's ability to defend itself. Refusing to stop there, Glazik makes an unequivocally libertarian argument for a new private sector-based criminal justice system that would be achieved by simply letting all the inmates out and forcing the free market to clean up the mess. What he approvingly refers to as a deregulation of criminal punishment and letting the private sector determine how best to prevent ourselves from getting robbed. Or you can merely arm yourself and protect your own. This isn't too different than arguments coming from the militia movement in America or the chainsaw-wielding Colombian paramilitaries that arrived in the village promising to restore order. In high finance, the laissez-faire approach has proved to be a disaster, Glazik says. For petty crime, it would be a boon. No mention is made in this story of the high level of enduring poverty in America amid great wealth, nor of the high level of violence when compared to the rest of the developed world. Yes, even in our low crime era, readers are led to believe that Americans constructed this nightmare out of either cruelty or an insufficient tolerance for public violence. There is something strikingly parochial. I'm not sure what that word means. Parochial. This isn't very entertaining for any of you, is it? I need to find ways to engage. The problem is the phone's there, so I hate having to look it up on the computer because it's so... I'm not doing it. There's something strikingly parochial about this telling of history. Crime is portrayed as a uniquely American phenomenon that can't be explained by material conditions. For Glazik, it's much simpler than that. It's sadism, not avarice, that fuels the country's prison crisis. A decade since the N+1 essay, there are signs that crime is once again rising. Last year, 21,570 people were murdered in the United States, the largest single-year surge in the country's history, and an increase of 4,901 killings from 2019. Last year also saw the highest number of gun deaths in history. The overwhelming majority of these deaths were concentrated in America's poorest and most racially segregated neighborhoods. It's not surprising that commentators are speculating about whether we're set for a return to the bad old days of the 1980s and 90s. While there is no simple explanation for this rise, the political right is quick to blame the development on growing anti-police sentiment following Black Lives Matter protests. Facing increased scrutiny, they say cops have become hesitant to intervene and actually stop crimes. As a result, criminals are gaining confidence that they can break the law with impunity. But security concerns resonated far beyond Fox News. Americans believe that crime is getting worse. A 2020 Gallup poll found that 78% thought that crime had increased over the course of that year, the highest number recorded since 1993. It is hard not to see the election of figures like Eric Adams as New York mayor as not, at least in part, driven by crime concerns. In the run-up to his election, one survey found that 46% of likely voters said crime or violence is a main problem in New York today. Data shows that crime is still down significantly from 1990s levels and that some categories of crime actually decreased last year. But that doesn't render perceptions about rising crime less politically significant, nor the fact that crime seems more concentrated than ever in poor areas. Hey, murders are way up, but robberies are down are not exactly comforting words. Polling shows that 86% of all Americans want the police to spend the same amount of time or more in their neighborhood. But whatever conservatives say, that doesn't mean there's a budding Blue Lives Matter coalition in the country. Americans also indicate that they want a different type of policing. 58% say that policing requires major changes, and 79% think that police violence is a serious problem. What should we have to say about crime, then, an issue that looks like it will be an important part of politics for years to come in the United States and beyond? Anxieties about public security have fueled the rise of the far right globally, who promise to lower crime through bullets and prisons. Large groups of people can sincerely believe that their neighborhood, city, or country is becoming more dangerous, even when data points in the opposite direction. Republicans will spend much of the 2022 midterm election campaign talking about a crime wave in crime-infested Democrat-run cities, and Democrats are already showing signs of retreating from meaningful police reforms. Many on the left worry that talking about crime only empowers the police to commit abuses in the name of law and order. And socialists have rightly defined themselves over the last few decades in opposition to a staggeringly unjust criminal justice system. But we don't have to abandon opposition to mass incarceration or a critique of police to respond to crime. The stakes are too high to allow the right to define the politics of public safety through claiming, quote, the only good bandit is a den bandit, quote, end quote, or lock them all up, as an expression of popular will. Indeed, for decades, liberals echoed right-wing approaches to public security, introducing harsher drug laws, building prisons, and pairing worthy aims such as reducing the number of illegal guns in circulation with racist and anti-poor punitive measures. Elsewhere in the Americas, economic crises and the COVID-19 pandemic triggered even more severe increases in crime. 50,033 people in Brazil and 34,515 in Mexico were murdered in 2020. Many with guns that were smuggled out of the United States. Organized crime adapted quite well to pandemic conditions, not only retooling rackets, but exploiting the new opportunities presented by the crises, from fake vaccines to siphoning off some of the massive injection of liquidity that went into the global financial system. In some cases, as the state failed to provide social assistance, mafias filled the void, supplying PPE and enforcing lockdowns in the neighborhoods under their control. When the state is unable to administer public security, private security and paramilitaries close the gap, with devastating consequences for the left, as in Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico. Moreover, criminal activities from drug trafficking to extortion and illegal mining are central to the global economy. According to the United Nations, crime generates an estimated $2.1 trillion in global annual proceeds, about 3.6% of the world's GDP. The money from extortion and in drug trafficking flows through the same banks that the tax cheats and oligarchs use. By conservative estimates, the trade in illicit drugs alone is worth over $600 billion a year. The United States accounts for $150 billion of this, translating into about 1% of the total world GDP. Mafia capitalists, after all, are still capitalists, and they tend to ally with the state, or even the United States, when facing a threat from the working class. To make matters worse, the organizations that reap the rewards of illicit activities are the same mafias used by the state and capital to repress calls for leftist reform. From Sicily to Colombia, organized crime intimidates and murders trade unionists, peasant leaders, and socialists. Ugh, I feel so fidgety. I have not been doing sitting well lately. Okay. From Sicily to Colombia, organized crime intimidates and murders trade unionists, peasant leaders, and socialists. The profits from crime are often reinvested in dirty wars and counterinsurgencies. While not dismissing the ways in which the law is used to criminalize poor people of color, socialists should view crime itself as an index of oppression. Crime is born out of poverty and the miseries of capitalism. Simply put, crime is a real social problem, and those worst affected by it are the working class, in particular black and brown communities. The average victim of a crime worldwide is a worker commuting to and from their place of employment. The average victim of a crime worldwide is a worker commuting to and from their place of employment. Tackling crime requires the left to build a platform that dismantles both racist stereotypes about black criminality and the usual bromides about personal responsibility, without simply dismissing the issue as bigoted media hysteria. It also demands an analysis of what happens when the state is unable to guarantee public security and a way of dealing with the threat posed by organized crime. This does not mean socialists should buy into the moral panics that have driven drug wars, mass incarceration, and all those other solutions that have merely compounded the problem. It means we should take crime and the concerns of the working class seriously, and that anxiety regarding rising crime can be used to argue for the necessity of change. If we fail to do this, the far right and our enemies will seek to exploit real concerns over crime for their own benefit, as we have seen with tragic results in the rise of Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil. The good news is that socialists already have actual solutions to the problem. Through the radical redistribution of wealth and power, creating jobs, investing in education and housing, and providing health care and after-school activities, along with measures like taking guns off the streets, we can, in fact, reduce crime through building socialism. All our enemies can offer is repression, police, and prisons. Break it up with some salt, fat, acid, heat. Read a little bit about some animal fats by Samin Nosrat. So, animal fats. All meat-eating cultures make use of animal fats, which can be incorporated into food as a main ingredient, cooking medium, or seasoning depending on its form. Most aromatic molecules are repelled by water, so in meat they're predominantly found in an animal's fat. As a result, any animal's fat will taste much more distinctly of that animal than its lean meat. Beef fat tastes beefier than steak. Pork fat tastes porkier than pork. Chicken fat tastes more chickeny than chicken, and so on. Beef. When solid, it's called suet. Suet? Sweet? S-U-E-T. Liquid, it's called tallow. Beef fat is a crucial component in hamburgers and hot dogs, lending beefy flavor and enhancing moistness. I want to call it suet. Or another added fat, a hamburger would be dry, crumbly, and tasteless. Tallow is often used for frying French fries and cooking Yorkshire pudding, a giant popover traditionally served with prime rib. Pork. When solid, it's called pork fat. Liquid, it's called lard. Pork fat is an important addition to sausage and terrines, providing both flavor and richness. Use solid pork fat for barding and larding, two hilariously named terms for supplementing lean meats with solid fat to keep them from drying out. Barding is the term for covering lean meat with slices of pork belly, either smoked and called bacon, cured and called pancetta, or left unadulterated, to protect it from the dry heat of roasting, while larding refers to the act of threading pieces of fat through a lean piece of meat with a long, thick needle. Both processes add richness and flavor. Since it has a high smoke point, lard is a terrific cooking medium and is commonly used in Mexico, the American South, southern Italy, and the northern Philippines. It can also be used as an ingredient in doughs, though it should be used with care, because while it makes for a perfectly flaky empanada dough, its distinctly porky taste may not always be desirable in your blueberry pie. Chicken, duck, and goose. These fats are only used in their liquid forms as cooking media. Schmaltz, or rendered chicken fat, is a traditional ingredient in the Jewish kitchen. I love sizzling rice into it to lend it some chickeny flavor. Save duck or goose fat that renders when roasting a bird, strain it, and use it to fry potatoes or root vegetables. Few things are tastier than potatoes fried in duck fat. Lamb. Also called sweat or sweet, or something else. It's generally not rendered, but is an important ingredient in lamb sausage, such as merguez in countries where pork is not consumed. In general, fat makes meat taste good. We prize, even grade, steaks based on how marbled or fatty they are. There's also the fat that we don't love to eat, the rubbery, chewy lump at the top of a chicken breast, or the bit of brisket fat that always ends up on the edge of the plate. Why do we value some animal fats and eschew others? When four-legged animals are fattened up with lots of calories, the cuts of meat from the center of the animal receive the most flavor benefits. Some fat ends up layered between groups of muscles, or directly under the skin, as the cap of fat on the outside of the pork loin or prime rib. Some fat ends up within a muscle. This is the more prized kind of fat, what we call marbling when we look at a steak. As a well-marbled steak cooks, the fat will melt, making the meat juicier from within. And since fat carries flavor, many of the chemical compounds that make any one kind of meat taste like itself, beef like beef, pork like pork, chicken like chicken, are more concentrated in fat than in lean muscle. That's why, for example, chicken thighs taste more chickeny than the leaner breast meat. Though lumps of fat might not be so tasty on the plate, you can remove them from the meat and melt them down, then use the rendered fat as a cooking medium. The distinct flavors that I think it says chicken cooking media, and I think it said cooking medium in a part previously, page 70, under chicken, duck, and goose. The distinct flavors of animal fats lend themselves well to being used in dishes where the goal is to evoke a certain meatiness. Matzo balls fortified with schmaltz will amplify a chicken soup's chickeniness, and hash browns cooked in bacon fat will lend breakfast a smoky, rich flavor, even if no meat makes it onto the plate. A little animal fat will go a long way toward enriching and flavoring even the simplest foods. How can I find you? Where do I turn to? Oh. There's a world of fat. There's a wheel to help you choose which fat to use, based on the country. How to use the flavor maps. Flip this page open. Inside, you'll find one of 3 flavor maps in this book. Use it to navigate through the flavors of the world. Each level of the wheel contains a layer of information. Use the 2 inner layers to guide you to your cuisine of choice, and then refer to the outermost layer to choose the right fat for cooking foods from that cuisine. Dope. Fats of the world. Just as I discovered in Italy, cuisines are distinguished by their fats. Since fat is the foundation of so many dishes, choose culturally appropriate fats to flavor food from within. Use the wrong fat, and food will never taste right, no matter how carefully you use other seasonings. Don't use olive oil when cooking Vietnamese food, or smoky bacon fat when making Indian food. Instead, refer to this flavor wheel to guide your decision-making as you cook foods from around the world. Sauté garlicky green beans in butter to serve with a French-inspired meal, in ghee to serve alongside Indian rice and lentils, or with a splash of sesame oil to serve with glazed 5-spice chicken. You're the only power. You're the only power that can. Alright, I said last time I really was going to make a short video, so this time we really are going to make a short video. We're just going to do 3. I like to do 4 and have poetry, but actually, you know what? Fuck it. We're going to do it. Probably. Let's... Yeah, we'll read this. There's a little tidbit before chapter 2. So we're going to add the little tidbit of A People's Guide to Capitalism by Hadas Thier. Capitalism and soil. The violent social transformations that gave birth to capitalism destroyed the traditional ties that existed between humankind and the earth. The forcible expropriation of peasants alienated humanity from the natural world and led to a metabolic rift, as Marx described it, beginning a process that has driven us today to the brink of planetary destruction. Labor and the earth constitute society's original sources of wealth, Marx wrote. That is, everything that we require to live and thrive derives from the land and from our ability to do work to harness nature's great powers. Through the process of labor, a metabolic relationship has bound humans and nature together. Quote, Labor is, first of all, a process between man and nature, a process by which man, through his own action... I'm gonna reword this, just that little quote from Marx, and instead of writing man, I am going to write person. I'm going to say person. Or people. I'm going to say people. Labor is, first of all, a process between people and nature, a process by which people, through their own actions, mediates, regulates, and controls the metabolism between themselves and nature. They confront the materials of nature as a force of nature. They set in motion the natural forces which belong to their own body, their arms, legs, head, and hands, in order to appropriate the materials of nature in a form adapted to their own needs. Through this movement, they act upon external nature and change it, and in this way they simultaneously change their own nature. All of that was his pronoun, and man, but the enclosures in England put an end to collective use of land and instead turned both laborers and the natural world into mere inputs for agricultural and industrial production. Marx explained that for the first time, nature becomes purely an object for humankind, purely a matter of utility, ceases to be recognized as a power for itself, and the theoretical discovery of its autonomous laws appears merely as a ruse so as to subjugate it under human needs, whether as an object of consumption or as a means of production. While the masses of people were dispossessed, the land itself was robbed of nutrients as rapidly increasing output of industrial agriculture despoiled the earth. The soil was depleted of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which reappeared in the cities in the form of urban pollution, simultaneously poisoning the land and the city dwellers. Marx was profoundly disturbed by this development and considered it a breach in the natural relationship of humans to the earth. In Capital, Marx argued, all progress in capitalist agriculture is a progress in the art, not only of robbing the worker, but of robbing the soil. All progress in increasing the fertility of the soil for a given time is progress towards ruining the more long-lasting sources of that fertility. Capitalist production, therefore, only develops the technique and the degree of combination of the social process of production by simultaneously undermining the original sources of all wealth, the soil and the worker. Since Marx's and Engels' time, a far deeper crisis has befallen the Earth's ecosystem. Among our most timely and life-threatening challenges is that of climate change. Fossil fuels, which first became the dominant form of energy during the Industrial Revolution, now dominate the world economy and threaten our planet's survival. We'll discuss some of these critical issues in future chapters, but for the time being, we see that capitalism could only break through as a world system on the basis of conquering both humankind and the planet and subjugating both to its profit motive. Right. On to chapter 8. In The Ultimate Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams, we are in the book, the first part of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Chapter 8. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is a wholly remarkable book. It has been compiled and recompiled many times over many years and under many different editorships. It contains contributions from countless numbers of travelers and researchers. The introduction begins like this. Space, it says, is big. Really big. You just won't believe how vastly, hugely, mind-bogglingly big it is. I mean, you may think it's a long way down the road to the chemist, but that's just peanuts to space. Listen. And so on. After a while, the style settles down a bit, and it begins to tell you things you really need to know, like the fact that the fabulously beautiful planet Samin is now so worried about the cumulative erosion by 10 billion visiting tourists a year that any net imbalance between the amount you eat and the amount you excrete while on the planet is surgically removed from your body weight when you leave. So every time you go to the lavatory, it is vitally important to get a receipt. To be fair, though, when confronted by the sheer enormity of the distances between the stars, better minds than the one responsible for the guide's introduction have faltered. Some invite you to consider for a moment a peanut in Reading, and a small walnut in Johannesburg, and other such dizzying concepts. The simple truth is that interstellar distances will not fit into the human imagination. Even light, which travels so fast that it takes most races thousands of years to realize that it travels at all, takes time to journey between the stars. It takes 8 minutes to journey from the star Sol to the place where the Earth used to be, and 4 more years to arrive at Sol's nearest stellar neighbor, Alpha Proxima. For light to reach the other side of the galaxy, for it to reach Demogorgon, for instance, takes rather longer, 500,000 years. The record for hitchhiking this distance is just under 5 years, but you don't get to see much on the way. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy says that if you hold a lungful of air, you can survive in the total vacuum of space for about 30 seconds. However, it does go on to say that, what with space being the mind-boggling size it is, the chances of getting picked up by another ship within those 30 seconds are 2 to the power of 276,709 to 1 against. By a totally staggering coincidence, that is also the telephone number of an Islington flat where Arthur once went to a very good party and met a very nice girl whom he totally failed to get off with. She went off with a gatecrasher. Though the planet Earth, the Islington flat, and the telephone have all now been demolished, It is comforting to reflect that they are all in some small way commemorated by the fact that 29 seconds later, Ford and Arthur were rescued. Right. A computer chattered to itself in alarm as it noticed an airlock open and close itself for no apparent reason. This was because reason was in fact out to lunch. A hole had just appeared in the galaxy. It was exactly a nothingth of a second long, a nothingth of an inch wide, and quite a lot of millions of light years from end to end. As it closed up, lots of paper hats and party balloons fell out of it and drifted off through the universe. A team of 7 3-foot-high market analysts fell out of it and died, partly of asphyxiation, partly of surprise. 239,000 lightly fried eggs fell out of it too, materializing in a large wobbly heap on the famine-struck land of Pogrel in the Pansel system. The whole Pogrel tribe had died out from famine except for one last man who died of cholesterol poisoning some weeks later. The nothingth of a second for which the whole existed reverberated backward and forward through time in a most improbable fashion. Somewhere in the deeply remote past, it seriously traumatized a small random group of atoms drifting through the empty sterility of space and made them cling together in the most extraordinarily unlikely patterns. These patterns quickly learned to copy themselves. This was part of what was so extraordinary about the patterns, and went on to cause massive trouble on every planet they drifted onto. That was how life began in the universe. 5 wild event maelstroms swirled in vicious storms of unreason and spewed up a pavement. On the pavement lay Ford Prefect and Arthur Dent, gulping like half-spent fish. "There you are," gasped Ford, scrabbling for a finger hold on the pavement as it raced through the third reach of the unknown. "I told you I'd think of something." "Oh, sure," said Arthur. "Sure." "Bright idea of mine," said Ford, "to find a passing spaceship and get rescued by it." The real universe arched sickeningly away beneath them. Various pretend ones flitted silently by, like mountain goats. Primal light exploded, splattering space-time as with gobbets of jello. Time blossomed. Matter shrank away. The highest prime number coalesced quietly in a corner and hid itself away forever. "Oh, come off it," said Arthur. "The chances against it were astronomical." "Don't knock it. It works," said Ford. "What sort of ship are we in?" asked Arthur as the pit of eternity yawned beneath them. "I don't know," said Ford. "I haven't opened my eyes yet." "No, nor have I," said Arthur. The universe jumped, froze, quivered, and splayed out in several unexpected directions. Arthur and Ford opened their eyes and looked out in considerable surprise. "Good God," said Arthur, "it looks just like the sea front at Southend." "Hell, I'm relieved to hear you say that," said Ford. "Why?" "Because I thought I must be going mad." "Perhaps you are. Perhaps you only thought I said it." Ford thought about this. "Well, did you say it, or didn't you?" he asked. "I think so," said Arthur. "Well, perhaps we're both going mad." "Yes," said Arthur. We'd be mad, all things considered, to think this was Southend." "Well, do you think this is Southend?" "Oh, yes. So do I." "Therefore we must be mad." "Nice day for it." "Yes," said a passing machine. "Who was that?" asked Arthur. "Who? The man with the 5 heads in the elderberry bush full of kippers?" "Yes, I don't know, just someone." "Ah." They both sat on the pavement and watched with a certain unease as huge children bounced heavily along the sand and wild horses thundered through the sky, taking fresh supplies of reinforced railings to the uncertain areas. "You know," said Arthur with a slight cough, "if this is Southend, there's something very odd about it." "You mean the way the sea stays steady as a rock and the buildings keep washing up and down?" said Ford. "Yes, I thought that was odd too. In fact," he continued with a huge bang, Southend split itself into 6 equal segments which danced and sped giddily round each other in lewd and licentious formations. There was something altogether very strange going on. Wild yowling noises of pipes and strings seared through the wind. Hot donuts popped out of the road for 10 pence each. Horrid fish stormed out of the sky, and Arthur and Ford decided to make a run for it. They plunged through heavy walls of sound, mountains of archaic thought, valleys of mood music, bad shoe sessions, and footling hats, and suddenly heard a girl's voice. It sounded quite a sensible voice, but it just said 2 to the power of 100,000 to 1 against and falling. And that was all. Ford skidded down a beam of light and spun round trying to find a source for the voice, but could see nothing he could seriously believe in. "What was that voice?" shouted Arthur. "I don't know," yelled Ford. "I don't know. It sounded like a measurement of probability." "Probability? What do you mean?" "Probability. You know, like 2 to 1, 3 to 4, 5 to 4 against." "It said 2 to the power of 100,000 again to 1 against." That's pretty improbable, you know. A 1,000,000-gallon vat of custard upended itself over them without warning. But what does it matter? But what does it mean? Cried Arthur. What, the custard? No, the measurement of probability. I don't know at all. I think we're on some kind of spaceship. I can only assume, said Arthur, that this is not the first-class compartment. Bulges appeared in the fabric of space-time. Great, ugly bulges. Said Arthur as he felt his body softening and bending in unusual directions. Southland seems to be melting away. The stars are swirling a dust bowl. My legs are drifting off into the sunset. My left arm's come off too. A frightening thought struck him. Hell, he said, how am I going to operate my digital watch now? He wound his eyes desperately around in Ford's direction. Ford, he said, you're turning into a penguin. Stop it. Again came the voice, 2 to the power of 75,000 to 1 against and falling. Ford waddled around his pond in a furious circle. Hey, where are you? He quacked. Where are you? Where's going on? And is there any way of stopping it? Please relax, said the voice pleasantly, like a stewardess in an airliner with only 1 wing and 2 engines, one of which is on fire. You are perfectly safe. But that's not the point, raged Ford. The point is that I am now a perfectly safe penguin, and my colleague here is rapidly running out of limbs. It's all right. I've got them back now, said Arthur. 2 to the power of 50,000 to 1 against and falling, said the voice. Admittedly, they're longer than I usually like them, but isn't there anything, squawked Ford in avian fury, you feel you ought to be telling us? The voice cleared its throat. A giant petite four lolloped off into the distance. Welcome, the voice said, to the starship, Heart of Gold. The voice continued. Please do not be alarmed, it said, by anything you see or hear around you. You are bound to feel some initial ill effects as you have been rescued from certain death at an improbability level of 2 to the power of 276,000 to 1 against. Possibly much higher. We are now cruising at a level of 2 to the power of 25,000 to 1 against and falling. And we will be restoring normality just as soon as we are sure what is normal anyway. Thank you. 2 to the power of 20,000 to 1 against and falling. The voice cut out. Ford and Arthur were in a small, luminous pink cubicle. Ford was wildly excited. Arthur, he said, this is fantastic. We've been picked up by a ship powered by the infinite improbability drive. This is incredible. I heard rumors about it before. They were all officially denied, but they must have done it. They built the improbability drive. Arthur, what's happening? Arthur had jammed himself against the door to the cubicle, trying to hold it closed, but it was ill-fitting. Tiny, furry little hands were squeezing themselves through the cracks. Their fingers were ink-stained. Tiny voices chattered insanely. Arthur looked up. Ford, he said, there's an infinite number of monkeys outside who want to talk to us about the script for Hamlet they've worked out. Just want to say a quick thank you to y'all for joining once again. For the first time, for the second time, for the last time. For the middle time, for a little bit of time, for a long bit of time. For whatever time, for the moment that you're here, and for the moments that you're not. We're going to end this with some nice, easy poetry by Andrzej Wosnesensky, called Dogalips. To my dear four-footed friends at my readings. I trust every animal, but especially I adore dogs in concert. Here I am, reading half legally to you wolfhounds and hound dogs. A raccoon snuck in, past the ticket taker. A leather coat perfectly fitted like a falcon's hood squeezed into a seat. I still remember that sinuous skin dying for the lights to dim, her jaw-breaking yawn like the acrobat doing the splits, with the bliss of Bloch's La Belle Dame. Arching her back, a dog put out her paws like the legs of a chaise lounge. Long. The hall is mossy with marijuana, mad dog with 1,000 eyes, as in St. John's apocalyptic visions, 1,000 eyes, big business for contact lens makers. Bureaucrats drop dead. A poet is howling. Ferlinghetti sheepskin hat. A red wolf in a gray sheep's skin. A lamb in wolf's clothing. He lights his joint with a bench warrant. In time of judgment, a warrant hangs over us all, and this includes studs and bitches. Shaggy generation, you've got to judge if God won't judge. Those who hang us in supermarkets, those who make like Judas and make their haul. So I stood there, a murderer of the word, and my jacket creaked, a cow's hide stuffed with soul. Somewhere her sister's mood, in electric milking curlers, medieval metal dog tags shine on dogs' chests. To you, exuding perfume, I'm shouting the love of an earless Moscow mutt who has no medals. But still, I'm a bitch of a singer, and if I give a concert, all those Carusos would give their livers for my master's voice. Old Rover, old Fido, they understood without translation, for the nature of poetry is not in the grammar but in the gut. They understand without translation, no English-Russian dictionary, only the language of sky and field and the places where music hasn't lied. They understood by breathing deeply before the word was God. Moon and dog understood each other. I want to be understood. And to those who are deaf to poetry, a 6-foot collie will explain it all. Fangs bared. Translated by MSCLVRLF. Another day, another readings, another moment shared. May we all continue on for another day in the ways that it may be, in the ways that it comes. Peace.